Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Peter Counter and I am the editor-in-chief of FindBiometrics, where we are celebrating our 17th annual year in review. Throughout January on ID Talk, we will be interviewing biometrics and identity industry leaders about the major milestones not just of the year, but also of the previous decade. That's why in this latest episode, I am excited to welcome back David Benini, Vice President of Marketing and Product at Aware. This time, FindBiometrics Vice President of Digital Content Susan Stover sat down with David to talk about biometric applications in the burgeoning smart automotive space and the decade as a whole. In December, Aware released a white paper detailing the massive potential for biometrics in the automotive space, so this episode begins with a discussion of the most exciting commercial applications of strong authentication in connected cars and the special considerations around deploying biometrics in vehicles. The conversation turns to the decade in biometrics, and Benini lends his company's historied expertise on the topic to talk about the biggest milestones of the 2010s. Their conversation concludes with a look ahead for Aware as the new decade dawns. It's an enlightening conversation about new frontiers in identity, so without further ado, here is Susan Stover in conversation with Aware's David Benini on the ID Talk podcast.
Welcome to ID Talk. Today I'm joined by David Benini, Vice President, Marketing and Product for Aware, and I'm Susan Stover, VP of Digital Content, FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World. Thanks for joining us today, David.
It's a pleasure to be here, Susan. Great speaking with you.
So I really want to start out by talking about Aware recently put biometrics in the driver's seat with the recent white paper, Biometrics on the Road to Automotive Identity. So on the road ahead, what do you see as the most exciting applications for biometrics in the automotive industry?
Well, firstly, I'm excited about all the puns that are coming from talking about the automotive industry. I mean, they're almost endless. So the automotive industry is really exciting, right? There's so much going on there with innovation, not only with the vehicles, but different business models that are fundamentally changing how we think about cars and driving and getting from point A to B. And we talk about this a fair amount in the white paper. And so there's a lot of examples of how biometrics and identity can come into play in the automotive space. It's a diverse topic, it's a diverse arena, but I think clearly car sharing is one that is an obvious use case where identity plays a role. You know, we're thinking in the old days, you had a single person or a few family members accessing a car with a key. And so, you know, that was really essentially authentication based on something that you have. And so as we move to models where cars, a single vehicle, is shared by many different people in some way, it's clear how keys become less a physical token such as a car key becomes a lot less practical. And I think that applies both in kind of personal use of automobiles, but also in professional and commercial use. And so fleet management, I think, is another area that's really interesting, because you just think about how many very large companies rely so heavily on some aspect of automotive for their business, and managing very large teams of drivers. How can we help that process with identity and with biometrics? How can we help companies manage their fleets better and understand better about who is doing what in their fleet? So those are just a couple. I know in the white paper we really try to look at lots of different applications, but those are two that I think are really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And the paper makes a point of differentiating between in-car and out-of-car applications. Why is it important to make this distinction?
Well, so certainly from a vendor perspective, it's really important, but I think also for say, a car manufacturer. So if we think of the difference between in-car and out-of-car, if I'm out of car, we're thinking about authenticating on a mobile device. In that case, we're integrating biometric authentication into an app, for example. But when we move to the in-car paradigm, now we have to integrate this technology and hardware and sensors into the physical automobile. And changes like that don't happen right away. So there are often lead times of several years involved when you start talking about modifying or introducing new technologies inside the car. So I think that's a really fundamental kind of difference to understand. Now, in the fleet management, there is also this channel, this kind of aftermarket channel where you do see companies, very large companies, say custom modifying their vehicles. And that's another channel. And, obviously that gets around this notion of automobile manufacturers integrating into the actual OEM automobile. But so really there's lots of different channels that the biometrics has to find its way through depending on the use case.
Do you see parallels between the automotive biometrics industry and the consumer mobile device industry? How do these spaces compare when we're talking about biometric authentication?
Well, so that's a tricky one. I think if I look at the primary application right now, or the primary vertical that is adopting biometrics for authentication, I would say that's banking. And it's hard for me to see that much commonality between banking and automotive, aside from the two fundamental kind of use cases that are somewhat universal, which are identity proofing and then authentication. Really the nature of biometrics and the identity is that there's a very broad array of verticals in which these two sort of general use cases are very applicable. I think, in banking and some of the other verticals we're familiar with, like healthcare, it's fairly well defined what we're trying to achieve there. It is essentially identity proofing, like who is this person who is coming to us to initiate service, for example, or log into a bank account. Automotive, again, as we kind of go through in the paper, is a bit more open field. We've got concepts of entering your car, keyless entry and start using a mobile device, but then also these features when you get into the car, personalizing settings based on who you are, attributing data that the car is collecting based on who you are, making purchases. There's really compelling safety features that are also in the mix. And that's just on the commercial, and that's just on the private vehicle side. So then we move over to commercial, and you've got a whole other set of potential use cases. So it's a bit more of a complex vertical, I would say, and that's what I thought was interesting about that paper was kind of exploring all those a bit. It's clearly early days in that market, but we're absolutely getting a lot of interest and some traction with some different types of companies involved in that space.
There is a focus in this paper on the commercial use cases for
Yes.
biometrics, and it seems like there are quite a few opportunities that opened up just in the past decade, thanks to both the sharing and gig economy. Even for me, I use Lyft and Uber in my everyday life. So, which we know it also expanded for the potentials for biometrics in the modern workplace. On a broader note, what other opportunities do you see remote work opening up for biometrics?
So, right, this gig economy, sharing economy is really a theme of our time right now, right? It's just changing the nature of lots of different businesses. And what it's doing is introducing this notion that, when you transact between two parties, we're used to interacting and transacting with an institution, as a customer. And those institutions have established trust by establishing brand, and they have a history of success. And there's, they're kind of a known quantity in many cases. And what the sharing economy is introducing is this notion of establishing trust between individuals that don't know each other and will likely never even see each other. And that is, establishing trust between these two parties is core to all of these types of applications of the sharing economy, whether it's driving, and we've seen this in the news so much lately. We've got incidents happening between drivers and passengers. We have incidents between renters and owners. And so fundamentally, establishing trust is just absolutely imperative to the business model. And this is really what biometrics is all about. In one sense, for the identity proofing, who is this person? Can we kind of establish an identity for this person that we can count on, that's consistent? And when you do that, you are establishing accountability. So when you use biometrics, you're saying, hey, this is me, and no matter what happen, whatever I try to do, if I try to have a new identity, if I have a new digital identity in the future, biometrics are going to help companies resolve that. So there's going
Mhm.
to be more accountability. And then on the authentication side, it's just allowing these two parties to trust each other more.
Absolutely.
Aware has been a leading supplier of biometric software since 1992, when it was among the very first companies to provide biometric SDKs. Today, Aware offers the broadest product portfolio in the industry, with fingerprint, face, iris, and voice-based solutions ranging from passwordless authentication to a full-featured criminal ABIS. Among Aware's products are category leaders, including its Nomi liveness detection algorithms, its BioSP middleware and workflow platform, and many of its SDKs and applications that are industry standards used in hundreds of systems globally. Visit aware.com to learn how Aware can bring identity solutions to life with biometrics. And now, back to the podcast.
Aware is a longtime leader in the biometrics industry, giving your company a full view of the accelerated evolution we've seen in the later half of the decade. What would you say are the biggest milestones from the 2010s?
Yeah, so clearly the biometric space has gone through some big changes. If I've been in this arena for a while, and in the 90s it was, you could say, kind of a sleepy industry. It was really about fingerprints and law enforcement and sending files
Mhm.
to the FBI and getting results of a search. And then the 2000 knots were really post 9/11 focus, where we were looking to use biometrics in a lot of new applications, namely border management, defense, and also credentialing. And I think that concept kind of led us to the 2010s, where we saw Apple introduce the Touch ID,
Mhm.
and, and then later on, facial recognition became important. So I think for Aware in the 2010s, I think we've been effective at expanding our product portfolio to address these vastly different applications and really keeping on top of those. And what that has meant is really recognizing not only what's going to be important, say, in the next couple of years, but also how Aware can contribute to that. And so for example, as we're looking in the 2010s, we really saw private sector applications become much more important. So identity proofing and authentication for banking, as an example. So I think we recognized pretty early on the importance of liveness detection in that function, and so we began working on that pretty aggressively several years ago, with the understanding that without liveness detection, the facial recognition for authentication or identity proofing simply was not viable.
Absolutely.
Um, on the other side of things, and we're still really active on the public sector side too. We are, that is clearly, a huge priority for us as well. We're by no means walking away from that market, quite the contrary. So we see an opportunity in the ABIS arena to to provide a new kind of product, and that's what we're doing. So we're providing an ABIS that is fundamentally designed to be open and prevent vendor lock-in and be flexible and essentially be future-proof. And if you know something about the ABIS market, there's not a ton of options that you could describe that way on the
Mhm.
market today. So that is an exciting opportunity for us to take a lot of technology that we've had and provided to the market in a more kind of granular level, bringing that together and providing a system solution that is new and modern and really addressing some of the requirements that we see in that market.
And biometrics were a global phenomenon this decade. And as FindBiometrics, we travel the world going to all different kinds of conferences. We always run into Aware. What regions do you think show the most promise for biometric adoption?
So I think so. We see adoption on every continent, and I think they just tend to be in different stages in their adoption. I'd say the one that is really exciting for us is Latin America,
Mhm.
and I think there's a bunch of reasons why that's the case. In Latin America, you clearly have a need. I'm thinking of places like it's not a monolithic place, but Brazil in particular,
Hmm.
you have not only a real need to address fraud and other applications that are important and where biometrics are applicable, but you also just see a real openness to the technology and to the concept of using biometrics for identity. Whereas, I think in Latin America, tend to see a perception of biometrics to be about identity and not about personal private information. They tend to
Yeah.
be seen more as a means to express identity. The other location is Africa. So that is a really interesting market. And I've said this before, but as we saw 20 years ago or so, where Africa was able to kind of leapfrog the whole kind of landline type of telephone network and go straight to mobile phones. And they were able to achieve a really rapid expansion of telecommunication services throughout the continent using mobile technology. And I see a very close analogy with biometrics and identity,
Hmm.
where we can kind of leapfrog these older fashioned notions of what identity is. Is it a card with your name on it, or is it a mobile phone with a digital identity on it?
Hmm.
And I think Africa is particularly interesting, given the opportunity to address the need for banking services to reach more people. So we have an underbanked population there.
Hmm.
That's a great example of where biometrics is absolutely making a huge impact.
Well, yeah, definitely. And I know that Peter O'Neill caught up with you at ID for Africa last year, talking about this leapfrog effect and specifically in the content of Africa. And we'll be reporting live from there again because we're seeing, there is a rapid adoption in that area. So I think that's definitely the right way to go.
Yep.
And it is clear by now that financial services and consumer mobile devices were the front line of biometric innovation in this decade. What markets do you expect to embrace biometrics next, especially as we see advances in IoT, AI, and wireless connectivity?
Well, there's several. I'm excited about what I call enterprise security, identity, and access management, where we're helping enterprises secure their assets and secure identities for their workers, but also their customers. So, really moving their authentication to a passwordless mode, and that's compelling. Clearly, I just talked about automotive.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if they're next, but I think they're within the next few years. We'll definitely see more and more of this, and it'll just become kind of second nature. I think that when we've already gotten used to talking to our cars and using voice recognition for that, and I think we'll see we'll see facial recognition follow closely on the heels of that. And there's some challenges to work out. The environment in a car is challenging, right? People drive at night. That's a challenge to address, but it will be addressed, and I think it's going to be adopted. Healthcare is obviously another area where we expect to see adoption, particularly for patient ID. And then finally, digital credentials, I think, is in this, at least in the next 5 years, I think will really make inroads. So digital credentials on a mobile phone, for example, and I'd like to see decentralized identity schemes see more adoption. I know Canada is leading the way in some ways in that realm, and I think we're going to see more of that in the market. So it remains a pretty dynamic market, exciting. There's lots of applications beyond banking and government. There's no question.
Biometrics hold the promise to make passwordless multi-factor authentication a reality, with a more secure and convenient approach than other methods. But biometric techniques such as facial recognition are non-starters without a liveness detection approach that is effective without degrading the user experience. Aware's NOMI framework for biometric authentication offers NIST-tested facial recognition as well as optional voice recognition, which boosts performance by a factor of 10. NOMI includes market-leading face and voice liveness detection algorithms, which are completely passive, requiring no user interaction. Visit aware.com to learn how you can use Nomi to enable your identity solution with biometrics-based passwordless authentication. And now, back to the podcast.
And in terms of looking, forward to the next decade, what can we expect from Aware in the new year?
Well, I think we're really seeing some of the products that we've been working hard on in the last couple of years get deployed, and that's clearly exciting. So our mobile authentication product is called Nomi. It has face and voice authentication with liveness detection for both modalities, and those are just continuing to deploy. We have a big pipeline for that product in banking and in other verticals. It's also being adopted for identity proofing. So banks are using biometrics to onboard new customers. They're checking their facial biometrics against their driver's licenses as part of that process. So that's all really exciting. In the second category is our ABIS, as I mentioned. So we do expect to have deployments of that product in 2020 in government applications, both civil, what we call civil ID, but also criminal applications. And then finally, something that we're also expecting to see further deployments for is our software as a service, which we call Indigo. So Indigo is a software as a service platform that addresses particular use cases, but also is available in the form of microservices. And we see an increasing trend to utilize microservices, say, from the cloud or from a private cloud, as opposed to, say, incorporating an SDK into an application. So that's another trend that I think we're really well positioned to take advantage of. We have a broad array of technology that's available from a REST service, and so that's just another kind of area that we're pretty excited about. And then finally, our BioSP remains the market-leading platform for integrating disparate systems. It's a workflow middleware platform, whatever you want to call it. But we're also going to see new government projects and commercial projects where that product will be included.
Well, we're looking forward to covering all of those new developments in 2020.
Please do.
Yeah. How can our listeners get in contact with your company to learn more?
Well, we do have a website, aware.com. We're on social media. We're on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I am available here for anyone who'd like to give us a shout. Reach out at our website, and I'm happy to talk to you and tell you more about what's going on with Aware.
Great. Well, it's always great to hear from you, David.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
And so concludes Susan Stover's conversation with David Benini, Vice President of Marketing and Product at Aware. To learn more about automotive biometrics, multi-factor authentication, and other topics discussed in this episode of ID Talk, visit aware.com. And be sure to visit FindBiometrics.com to read our Year in Review featured coverage, in which our expert editorial team is analyzing the intriguing results from our recently complete Year in Review survey. I want to thank David Benini and Aware for lending expertise to this episode. Today's interview, again, was conducted by Susan Stover. Our podcast theme music is by Logomrad. I have been your host, Peter Counter. Thank you for listening to the ID Talk podcast.